The gale off the coast of Pike carried the tang of salt and ancient sorrow. It wrapped around the towers and turrets of the castle like an unwanted guest, a subtle reminder of the iron price each man of the Isles must pay. Theon Greyjoy stood atop the highest rampart, his dark hair whipped across his face. He narrowed his eyes at the horizon. The sea churned, its surface dappled with pale moonlight. It felt like a calling, a distant voice from the depths, beckoning him toward a fate he never thought would be his to claim. He had returned to Pike some moons ago in the aftermath of countless miseries that had shaped him in ways he could scarcely understand. The specter of his mistakes, invading Winterfell, betraying the Starks, clung to him still. Yet the old gods must have held a strange sense of humor, because here he stood, no longer the insecure ward of the North, no longer the broken soul who cowered under Ramsay's cruelty, but a man on the brink of destiny. A man with the keys to the Iron Throne within his grasp if he dared to seize them. He had confided in few about his ambitions. The Ironborn had always scorned the kingdoms of Westeros for their softness, their endless cycles of fealty and betrayal. Theon himself had once yearned only to be acknowledged and loved, caught between two worlds that claimed him and then cast him aside. But a chance alliance, formed in the direst of circumstances, now opened a path that led beyond Pike's jagged shores. At first, Theon dreaded the thought of even entertaining the notion that the Iron Throne might be his. His father, Balon Greyjoy, had ignited a rebellion years ago that ended in the utter humiliation of House Greyjoy, culminating in Theon's boyhood captivity with the Starks. Theon remembered the day Ned Stark's men took him. He had been only a child, forced to kneel before men who did not value iron or the old ways of the seas. Their gods were not his. Their traditions were foreign. He was the boy who'd lost his home, the boy who'd grown to crave acceptance from the very people who'd stolen him away. Yet iron was forged in adversity. Now he wanted more than acceptance, he wanted a sense of wholeness. He wanted recognition for what he endured and overcame. The question that lingered like a fine mist was, could he truly be the one to bring the Iron Islands to preeminence? Could he unite the fractious lords of the Seven Kingdoms under the banner of the Kraken? These nights on the ramparts, Theon whispered silent prayers to the drowned god, an entity as unyielding as the rocky coastline beneath him. Sometimes he felt the presence of the old gods of the North, too, as though the ancient weirwoods he had once prayed to still watched him from afar. He might have drifted between faiths, but who was he to deny any god that might be listening? When he descended the worn stairs and entered the main hall, he found Yara waiting. She leaned against the ancient driftwood throne of House Greyjoy, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity only a sibling could muster. Gone was the mocking scorn that once defined their interactions. Now there was a quiet sense of acknowledgement. In her hands she clutched a letter, a summons, in fact. The raven that delivered it had been picked clean by the crows outside the castle, but its message was intact. "They're calling a council at the ruins of Harrenhal," Yara said, her voice softer than the Theon of old would have ever imagined. "Lords from across the realm will be there. They want to discuss the future of Westeros. Seems like they're in no shape to put up a fight against an Ironborn presence." Theon nodded, his thoughts a swirl of cautious excitement and dread. Harrenhal was a place of ill omen, its hallways and courtyards haunted by more tragedies than he could count. But it was also a seat of immense significance. Whatever alliances or decisions were hammered out there might shape the kingdoms for decades, if not longer. "Then we sail at first light," Theon said. He felt a tremor in his voice, masked by resolve. "I want our best men, and I want them to know we're not there to wage war yet. We're there to make our intentions clear." Yara raised an eyebrow. "And those intentions would be?" A flash of the old Theon, arrogant, eager to prove himself, might have answered that question with a snarl. He might have boasted, pounded his chest. But too many failures had taught him humility. "We'll keep that a secret for now," he said. "Let's just say that we're not going to accept a patchwork arrangement. Either the Iron Islands prosper, or we take what we're owed by force. One way or another, we're done bending the knee." The corners of Yara's mouth turned up in a faint smile, just for a moment. She pushed off from the driftwood throne and walked past him, giving him a firm clap on the shoulder before she went. Once she had viewed Theon as an untested boy who played at being Ironborn. She had ridiculed his manners, his vanity, and his desperate desire for approval. Now he sensed her respect tinged with caution. She had bled for her people, fought in battles across the seas, weathered the storms of the War of the Five Kings. If she saw the glimmer of something worthy in Theon, maybe he could trust in it, too. Theon stood there for a long moment, alone in that great hall that stank of salt and rotting wood. His father's voice seemed to echo in the dark corners. "What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger." Despite the old man's cruelties, perhaps those words rang true. Theon Greyjoy had died 1,000 times in chains, in betrayal, and in shame. Now something new was taking root in him, fueled by a determination he hadn't known he was capable of. By dawn, the harbors of Pike were alive with activity. Longships bobbed on restless waters, their sails bearing the Kraken sigil. Grim-faced men hoisted barrels of provisions, sharpened axes glinting in the early light. Theon walked among them, head held high, returning their curt nods of acknowledgement. There was an unspoken question in many eyes. Was this the same boy who had turned on Winterfell all those years ago, only to fall into the hands of monsters? Could he lead them to greatness? He tried not to let his uncertainty show. Leadership, he had learned, was a performance as much as it was genuine conviction. If you looked and acted the part, men might follow you. And Theon intended to deliver on that promise one way or another. Standing on the prow of his own ship, the Sea Drake, Theon breathed in the brine-laden air. Yara's vessel, the Black Wind, was already gliding out of the harbor, her silhouette a proud testament to the Ironborn's skill and ferocity. Ships bearing the names Seafire, Maiden's Bane, and Reaver's Kiss followed in her wake. Once, Theon might have felt giddy at the thought of commanding such a fleet. Now, he felt only the weight of destiny on his shoulders. Heavy, but not unbearable. He thought of the letter of Harrenhal, of the lords who would gather there to carve up the future of the realm. Among them might be old enemies, or perhaps those who still believed the Ironborn were naught but raiders and reavers. Yet Theon had garnered the ear of one influential faction, one that saw in him a chance to shift the power balance. Their terms had been delivered in hushed tones, in the shadow of midnight fires, but the gist was simple. If Theon could bring stability to the Iron Islands, if he could promise certain trade routes and vantage points along the coastline, a coalition might arise to name him not just Lord of the Isles, but King of the Seven Kingdoms. Sounded mad even to him, but as the sails caught the wind and his ships cut through the waves, Theon clung to the notion that the greatest transformations often grew from the most unlikely seeds. He could not erase the past, but perhaps he could forge a future that would eclipse it. The journey to Harrenhal was grueling, the riverlands battered by rains that flooded the banks of the Trident. When the Ironborn fleet disembarked at the nearest viable port, Theon and his men trudged through sodden fields and half-washed-out roads. The bleak sky reflected on the puddles, and more than once Theon found himself scanning the horizon, half expecting some ambush. But the countryside remained eerily silent, as though the ghosts of all the wars that had raged here lingered just beneath the surface. When the ramparts of Harrenhal finally loomed in the distance, twisted spires of blackened stone, Theon felt a chill creep over him. This castle had seen death and betrayal since the day it was razed. Some said it was cursed by the fires of the Targaryen dragons that had melted parts of its towers. Others claimed no house that took it ever held it for long. Yet it was here that Westeros would attempt to decide its fate again. Theon's boots left muddy footprints across the drawbridge. The gates yawned open, manned by men bearing no single sigil but a motley array of colors. It was as if the entire realm had collectively gathered under a banner of necessity and uncertainty. Yara walked beside him, her expression a careful mask. A handful of trusted captains flanked them, each silent and watchful. This was not Pike, where the Greyjoy name held sway. Here, they were interlopers in a place soaked in other people's blood. Once inside the castle's cavernous great hall, Theon noted representatives from various noble houses, some openly scowling at the newcomers. A hush spread as the Ironborn entered, and Theon felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. He met them with a calm, implacable stare, refusing to let doubt crack his facade. Then, amidst the quiet, a single voice greeted him. "Theon Greyjoy, is it?" said a lord draped in a cloak of dark green. His face bore the lines of weariness and care. "You've come a long way to throw in your lot with the rest of us. I'd not have expected an Ironborn to show up for negotiation." Theon recognized him from descriptions as Lord Edmure Tully of the Riverlands. He inclined his head politely. "We all have a stake in what happens next. The Iron Islands included. Better we talk than raid each other's shores, wouldn't you agree?" Lord Edmure's gaze flickered from Theon's face to the Kraken sewn on his tabard. "We'll see about that," he murmured, not unkindly. There were others, 2 Tyrell bannermen, a handful of northern lords who'd survived the chaos in the wake of the Bolton's downfall, and even a few men wearing the black of the Night's Watch, perhaps on some errand for the new Lord Commander. It was a mosaic of alliances, each tenuous, each capable of fracturing at the slightest provocation. Theon cleared his throat. "I come with an offer," he began, the words echoing in the hall's oppressive silence. "House Greyjoy has ships, skilled warriors, and strategic locations. If you want to build a stable kingdom, you'll need access to the sea. You'll need someone who understands it. In return, my people want security. We want the freedom to worship as we will. And we want to ensure that we're no longer treated as outcasts in a realm that always seems to forget us until it wants our ships." For a moment, no one spoke. Then a murmuring began, a ripple of curiosity and skepticism. Theon let it linger. He had learned patience from his time in the north, from his days waiting for recognition that never came. No one would simply hand him the realm. But if he could sow the idea, plant the seed that the Ironborn were more than raiders, that the Greyjoy scion was more than a broken boy, perhaps the improbable could become possible. A voice rang out from the far side of the hall, a woman's voice, sharp and sure. "You expect us to believe your house has changed overnight, Theon Greyjoy? We remember what your father did during his rebellion. We remember what you did to Winterfell." Bracing himself, Theon turned to face her. She was tall, with auburn hair pulled back in a single braid. A Fry? A Bracken? He wasn't certain. Her words held an accusation that might have once crushed him with guilt. But now he steadied himself. "I remember too," he said softly. "And I have paid for those sins. Paid in blood, in flesh, and in a broken spirit. Nothing will erase them, and I won't ask your forgiveness. What I am asking is that we look beyond the past. We have a chance to build a new future. Let's not let our old grievances blind us to what we can gain." The woman's expression held doubt, but also a hint of something else, perhaps the faintest spark of interest in what he proposed. In that moment, Theon understood that the battle for the Iron Throne would be fought not just with swords and ships, but with words, alliances, and the fragile currency of trust. He stood tall, letting the hush settle again. Somewhere in the distance, the wind howled through the damaged towers of Harrenhal, a mournful dirge. Theon could almost hear it whisper, "You dare to dream of a crown built on haunted ground. You dare to dream of redemption." But he did dare, because he was done being the broken boy. And though the road ahead was twisted with pitfalls, he believed that for once in his life, he might shape his own destiny instead of dancing to someone else's tune. Silence enveloped the hall after Theon's bold assertion. A tremor of possibility rippled through the gathering, a momentary hush that carried the weight of a new dawn, or perhaps the faint echo of old grudges refusing to die. He could feel the uncertain glances skitter across his frame like sparks that fail to catch. They were testing him, waiting to see if he would shrivel under their doubt or forge onward. Theon kept his chin high. If he buckled now, he might as well return to Pike and be done with it. From the far end of the chamber, a man with a somber face and broad shoulders cleared his throat. He introduced himself as Lord Garland Tyrell, in place of his brother, who was tending to business in Highgarden. Though the Tyrell name carried the scent of roses, there was nothing soft in Garland's demeanor. "We have heard rumors," he said, his voice echoing across the great hall. "Rumors of a plan to reforge the kingdom in blood. Yet here you stand, speaking of alliances and stability. How should we interpret these conflicting tales?" Theon offered the barest hint of a smile. "Rumors often sprout from seeds of fear. I am Ironborn. We do not fear conflict, but I have learned that war is easier to begin than to end. My father's rebellion taught us that. The realm is exhausted, my lord. The War of the Five Kings claimed too many lives, left too many scars. If another war is to come, let it be the last one necessary to secure peace." A murmur spread among the gathered lords and ladies, a soft rumble of mixed reactions. Some scoffed, some seemed intrigued. Theon knew he had no illusions of universal acceptance. He simply needed enough lords to listen, to consider. The seeds of any grand plan could take root in the strangest of soils. He became acutely aware of Yara's unwavering gaze on him. She stood just behind his right shoulder, a silent sentinel. Gone were the days when she would mock him openly. She understood that in this world of ephemeral loyalties and shifting alliances, House Greyjoy had a single shot at elevating itself to a position that even the Targaryens had once envied. If Theon faltered, all would be lost. Garland Tyrell spoke again. "We do seek peace, but we will not bow to intimidation or demands that force us to cast aside the memory of old betrayals. Theon Greyjoy, you speak of forging a stable realm under your leadership. Might I ask what entitles you to such a claim? The Iron Islands, for all their naval might, have never ruled beyond their shores." He had expected the question. He bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the Tyrell's concern. My entitlement is not born from arrogance, Lord Garland, but from necessity. In times of chaos, power shifts to where it can be wielded effectively. House Greyjoy controls a formidable fleet, and that fleet can keep the coasts and trade routes secure. The Seven Kingdoms were once united under dragons, then under wolves and lions and stags. Perhaps now it is time for the Kraken to rise from the deep and bind the realm together. A cold hush greeted his statement. He had named it plainly, his ambition for the Iron Throne. Many might label it madness, but sometimes madness lit the path for the future. Theon allowed the silence to linger, as if to say, let them think me audacious. Let them think me reckless. For he knew that behind the scenes there were those who whispered that an Ironborn king, if tamed by proper counsel, might be the best chance to preserve the kingdom's unity. At length, a voice Theon recognized called out. That seat's never brought anything but grief to whoever sits upon it. He turned and saw Ser Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, standing near a pillar. Davos was older now, lines of fatigue etched on his brow, but his measured gaze suggested he still believed in the possibility of honor in a world rife with treachery. Lord Stannis once believed he was the rightful heir, Davos continued. And where did that lead us? More bloodshed, more war. If you claim the crown, Theon Greyjoy, how will you be any different? Theon met Davos's stare. They had encountered each other briefly in the past, though never on friendly terms. I cannot guarantee I'll be different, Theon said softly, allowing a note of raw honesty into his voice. I can only promise I have seen the worst of men, and I have been the worst of men. I have been broken in body and spirit. Perhaps that has taught me more about the cost of war than any who have merely dabbled in it. Davos didn't respond immediately, but his quiet, considering gaze was as good as a conversation. Theon had seen real darkness. Sometimes that was the only way to value the light. Lord Edmure Tully stepped forward, clasping his hands behind his back. Harrenhal was chosen as neutral ground for these talks. Our goal is to form a coalition strong enough to prevent the realm from splintering again. Some houses still cling to the notion of independence, others to ancient claims. We stand on a precipice, and the next step could send us all tumbling into another war. If you're serious about your intentions, Theon Greyjoy, I suggest you meet with each of us privately. Lay out your terms clearly, and let us weigh them. Theon glanced around the hall, reading the faces that ranged from hostile to doubtful to curious. I welcome the chance, he said, though I would request safe conduct. For myself and my men. You shall have it, Lord Edmure replied, his tone brooking no disagreement from the other lords. But be warned, the walls of Harrenhal are thin with ghosts. Secrets don't remain hidden long here. A ghost of a smile flickered across Theon's lips. I have few secrets left, my lord. That evening, the Ironborn quartered themselves in a wing of the castle that seemed marginally less damp and cursed than the rest. Yara oversaw the securing of the perimeter, mindful that the halls of Harrenhal had swallowed the unwary before. Theon prepared for the days ahead, scribbling outlines of strategy by the flickering light of a tallow candle. His penmanship was hardly graceful, but the content mattered more than the form. With careful strokes, he drafted the potential shape of a new kingdom. The trade routes the Ironborn would protect, the taxes they would levy, the new alliances they would forge with the North, the Reach, the Stormlands, and beyond. Amid these preparations, he heard a knock on his door. Enter, he called. Yara stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She leaned against the stone wall, arms folded, studying him with a critical eye. You're taking on a lot, she said flatly. He dipped his quill into the ink, not looking up. Would you have me do any tea? Less. There's a difference between ambition and overreach. You know what our people are like. They'll be suspicious of this talk of crowns and alliances. They want spoils, not diplomacy. If you fail, they'll never follow you again. Theon paused, letting the tip of his quill rest against the parchment. I know, he said softly, but maybe this is the only way to break the cycle. Our father tried to take what wasn't his. I'm trying to earn it, or at least broker it in a way that benefits us all. Yara snorted softly, though not without a trace of amusement. I just don't want you to forget who we are. We're Ironborn. We pay the iron price. Theon finally looked up, meeting her gaze. And it's that very identity that can be our greatest strength or our undoing. Believe me, Yara, if diplomacy fails, we can still pay the iron price. But I'd rather raise the Kraken in a realm that accepts us than one that curses our name. She studied him for a moment longer, then gave a curt nod. Fine, but don't lose yourself in these talks, brother. He resumed writing after she left, the scratching of the quill against paper the only sound in the lonely chamber. The fortress seemed alive with the groans and whispers of its haunted past, the weight of countless tragedies pressing down on him. Still, he pushed forward. If Harrenhal was cursed, perhaps Theon could harness that curse and turn it into something else. He felt like a blacksmith at the forge, hammering a new shape out of battered iron. The next day dawned gray and frigid, a sullen drizzle pattering against the tower windows. Theon began his private meetings, each in a small, torchlit antechamber off the main hall. Lords and ladies came to him in turn, some accompanied by retinues of knights, others by scribes who noted every word. He laid out his vision. The Ironborn would secure trade routes along the coasts, ensuring safe passage for goods and travelers. In exchange, they would receive fair tribute from the other kingdoms. No longer would they be raiders, but custodians of commerce. Some scoffed at the notion, calling it an oxymoron. Peaceful Ironborn? Theon met their derision with steel in his voice. We are as peaceful or as violent as we choose. Help me give my people a reason to choose peace. With every conversation, Theon felt the intangible weight of possibility shift. Some listened earnestly, taking notes or nodding slowly. Others outright refused to engage, storming out with curses on their lips. And still others, perhaps the most powerful in the hall, remained silent and inscrutable, weighing each word Theon spoke as if it were gold dust on a scale. Midway through the day, he found himself facing Lord Mathis Rowan of Golden Grove, a stout man with keen gray eyes. Lord Rowan surprised Theon by speaking at length of maritime trade, how it could enrich both the Iron Islands and the fertile lands of the Reach. We have grapes and grains, but our sea lanes have been plagued by pirates, Rowan said. If the Ironborn can rid us of that scourge, I would gladly open my markets to you. Theon saw a glimmer of opportunity. That is precisely the sort of arrangement I envision. The Iron Islands have the ships and we need purpose. Let us prove our worth and we will all profit. Lord Rowan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You speak well, Greyjoy. Better than I expected. But many will question your stability. Your past is not easily forgotten. And if you were to claim the Iron Throne, well, that is a question too large for me alone to answer. Theon recognized the opening. Then speak to your allies. I am not so naive as to think I can rule by decree alone. This must be a cooperative realm, or it will crumble as quickly as the last. As Rowan departed, Theon allowed himself a brief moment of hope. One lord swayed, perhaps, but how many more would he need before the rest followed? A majority? A coalition of power brokers? Or was it enough to simply strike deals with the most influential among them? By evening, Theon felt drained, each negotiation a trial that tested his patience and persuasion. His mind buzzed with half-formed alliances, demands, and counter-demands. He longed for the certainty of a sword in hand, a clear enemy across the field. Yet that path had led Westeros to ruin time and again. If he wanted to be king, he needed to master a different kind of warfare. Harrenhal's corridors, half-lit by sconces and strewn with damp rushes, felt like a labyrinth of unspoken secrets. Theon navigated them carefully, searching for a quiet moment to clear his head. He found himself wandering into a courtyard lined with twisted, blackened trees, remnants of some garden that had once been grand, now left to rot. An ancient well stood at its center, a bucket dangling from a splintered rope. Leaning against the well's edge, Theon closed his eyes and listened to the soft rustle of wind through dead leaves. He tried to recall the sense of home he once felt at Winterfell, fleeting though it was. The memory came with a sting of guilt, but it also came with a memory of warmth and belonging, something he rarely felt in the Iron Islands. He wondered if that longing was what had driven him to this point, the desperate need to be recognized, to atone, to matter. He was so absorbed in thought that he failed to hear the footsteps approaching. When he opened his eyes, there stood none other than Sansa Stark, wrapped in a cloak of pale fur. Her red hair glistened with droplets of drizzle, and her expression was guarded. Theon stiffened, a rush of conflicting emotions flooding him. He had not expected to see her here, though he should have known. The Starks had a stake in every corner of this realm, especially after the tragedies that befell them. Sansa, he managed, his voice catching. Her name felt like a stone dropping into the well of his memory. Once, she had been a girl betrothed to monsters in King's Landing, forced to navigate the twisted corridors of power. Now, she was a woman who had reclaimed the North, though at great cost. She regarded him calmly, her eyes reflecting a sorrow that was as old as the wars they had survived. "Theon," she said in a measured tone, "I heard rumors you were here, making grand claims." He swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. Rumors travel fast, it seems. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze flickering over him as though assessing the changes time had wrought. "You look different. Harder, yet not as broken as the last time I saw you." He let out a slow breath. "I am harder, and I'm trying to be whole again." For a moment, neither spoke. The drizzle persisted, painting the courtyard in shades of wet stone and regret. Sansa broke the silence first. "I want to know why you're doing this. A Greyjoy on the Iron Throne is no small ambition. Are you seeking power just to fill some void left by your past failures?" Theon found himself surprised at her directness, though he realized he shouldn't be. This was the same girl who had survived King's Landing, who had walked away from Ramsay Bolton's horrors. She had no patience for pretense. "Maybe once I would have," he admitted, his voice subdued. "But I've lost too much and I've done too many terrible things. If I'm doing this, it's because I believe there's a chance to make something better. For my people. For the realm." Sansa studied him, her features unreadable. "It's hard for me to trust that, especially given what happened at Winterfell." Her words were gentle but firm, like a dagger wrapped in velvet. "You know how many in the North despise your name. They think of the Greyjoys and remember betrayal." Guilt coiled in Theon's chest, sharp as any blade. "I understand," he said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I do hope that you, of all people, can sense my sincerity." She looked away, focusing on the ancient, gnarled bark of a nearby tree. "You saved my life once," she said, almost too softly to hear. "And perhaps I owe you a measure of gratitude for that. But trust is not so easily earned." He nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. "If I gain the throne, I won't forget the North. I swear that to you for whatever it's worth." Sansa sighed, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. "I don't know if that means anything yet. The North has suffered under Southern rulers time and again. They might not want another king from the South or from the Iron Islands, for that matter." "I'm aware," Theon said, "but the North can't isolate itself forever. Winter is harsh, but trade and alliances are the lifeblood of survival. If I succeed, I'll make sure the North is no longer overlooked." Her gaze flicked back to him. For a fleeting moment, Theon glimpsed a trace of vulnerability in her eyes, perhaps a longing for something stable and just. But the moment passed. She drew in a breath, steeling herself. "I'll be listening, Theon. We all will." Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing against the cold stone. Theon watched her go, wrestling with a swirl of emotions. Shame, regret, hope, and an odd sense of resolve. That brief encounter felt like a test, a reminder of the wounds that might never fully heal. Yet if he was to become king, he would have to carry not just his own burdens, but the collective weight of all those he had wronged. The days bled into one another in a steady cycle of negotiations, half-hidden barbs, and the ever-present tension that filled Harrenhal's drafty corridors. The lords and ladies of the Seven Kingdoms were a patchwork of battered reputations and unfulfilled promises. Each came with their own demands: protection, wealth, autonomy, vengeance. Theon listened, he bargained, and he compromised. Slowly, a tapestry of alliances began to form, though it was still fragile, frayed at the edges by mistrust and old vendettas. He met quietly with emissaries from the Stormlands who had lost faith in the Baratheon name after Stannis' defeat. They were open to new leadership, provided their lands were granted a measure of self-governance. He spoke with representatives of Dorne, who still nursed grudges over past Targaryen and Lannister misdeeds. They, too, sought justice or at least acknowledgement of their unique identity. Bit by bit, the realm's mosaic started to reconfigure around Theon's promise. Let us do things differently, or else risk repeating the endless cycle of wars. Throughout, Yara watched with a mixture of caution and pride. She had once seen her brother as a fool who wanted to prove himself. Now she saw a man who had been tempered by suffering, who might just be capable of leading their people out of the shadow of endless rebellion. At night, she would sit with him in the flickering torchlight, sifting through the details of each negotiation. They worked side by side, forging a new path for the Iron Islands and, possibly, for the entire realm. But with every day that passed, Theon became increasingly aware of a gathering storm. Whispers circulated of Lannister loyalists who still held sway in certain corners of the land, forming small, clandestine cells that would never accept a Greyjoy on the throne. In the Reach, some of the old Tyrell bannermen doubted whether Theon's reign would truly benefit them, or if they should cast their lot elsewhere. The memory of Daenerys Targaryen's campaign still lingered in some hearts. Even though her attempt to claim the throne had ended in dragonfire and devastation, there were those who believed a Targaryen heir might still exist somewhere, waiting for the right moment to appear. Despite these undercurrents of tension, Theon pressed on. He told himself that doubt was natural, that no king ascended without opposition. Yet he also knew that a single spark could set the realm ablaze once more, undoing all the careful work he had put into building a fragile trust. One evening, while reviewing parchments that outlined a proposed trade agreement with the Vale, Theon noticed a missive slipped beneath his door. The parchment was plain, sealed with a blob of black wax. No sigil adorned it. Immediately, his pulse quickened. He broke the seal to reveal a single sentence, scrawled in a bold hand: "Your plan will fail unless you prove your mettle in fire." Theon stared at the message, heart-pounding. Who would send such a missive? And what did they mean by "prove your mettle in fire"? Could it be a threat or a hint of some test he would soon face? His mind whirled with possibilities: an assassination plot, a challenge to combat, or some symbolic trial that harkened back to the Ironborn's old ways. He showed the note to Yara, who frowned. "Sounds like someone wants to push you into a confrontation," she said. "Perhaps a faction that believes only strength can earn the throne. Or maybe it's just an attempt to rattle you." Theon sat by the small hearth, letting the flames dance in his eyes as he considered. Whoever it is, they're right in one respect. All these negotiations mean little if I can't show that I still have the Ironborn spirit, that I can lead in war as well as in peace. Yara studied him, her gaze serious. "Be careful. We came here to prevent another war, not start one. But if you need to show strength, do it wisely." In the days that followed, Theon made a point of demonstrating that the Ironborn were not merely a band of reformed raiders turned merchants. He held sparring sessions in Harrenhal's courtyard, inviting other lords to watch as he and his best captains showcased the art of the axe and the cutlass. He ensured that rumors spread of how adept his men were at navigating not just the sea, but any form of battle. It was a calculated performance, a display designed to remind everyone that House Greyjoy was formidable and that bowing to a kraken might be wiser than challenging one. Yet even as he projected confidence, Theon felt a subtle unease. The note's mention of fire hovered in his thoughts. A confrontation seemed inevitable, but he couldn't pinpoint where it would strike from. He considered the possibility that the note was a bluff, but instinct told him otherwise. Finally, near the close of the Harrenhal summit, the tension that had coiled around the castle snapped. A small retinue from the Westerlands arrived late, escorted by armed knights wearing crimson cloaks embroidered with faint lion emblems. Though the Lannisters' power had waned, they still commanded fear in the hearts of many. Their leader was a sharp-featured man named Ser Reynard Hill, a distant cousin of the old Lannister line. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed he had a rightful claim to attention. "I come representing the interests of House Lannister," Ser Reynard announced in the Great Hall, his voice echoing. "We question why we should accept a Greyjoy as king when our seat in Casterly Rock remains strong. The gold of the rock still holds value, and we have loyal bannermen. If you seek a peaceful realm, perhaps you should submit to the leadership of those who better understand governance than marauders from the sea." A hush fell. Theon sensed many eyes upon him, waiting to see how he would react to such an open challenge. Lord Edmure looked uneasy, and Lord Garland Tyrell's expression darkened. Even Davos, standing by a column, shifted slightly as though preparing for a sudden conflict. Theon stepped forward, letting the cold hush of the hall envelop him. "Your claims might have held weight before," he said, addressing Ser Reynard with a measured calm that masked the tumult within him. "But House Lannister's star has fallen. The realm is tired of lions that roar but cannot protect the people from famine, raiders, or chaos. I do not deny the strength of your gold, but gold alone doesn't keep the waves at bay." Ser Reynard narrowed his eyes. "Then are we to become thralls to a kraken? Is that how you see the future of the Seven Kingdoms?" Theon pressed his lips together, feeling a surge of old anger well up. He thought of all the times he had been dismissed, belittled, or overlooked. This was the old attitude, Lannister arrogance, built on wealth and illusions of grandeur. "No," he said, "but if you cannot stomach the idea of a Greyjoy on the throne, I invite you to challenge me. Let us settle this as Ironborn do." If you truly believe House Lannister is the rightful heir, then step forward and prove it in single combat. A murmur of shock coursed through the assembly. Yara's eyes flicked to him, her expression a tense mixture of caution and approval. Ser Reynard hesitated, taken aback by the direct challenge. He glanced around, possibly expecting someone to intervene. Single combat, Ser Reynard repeated, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. That's how you propose to settle the fate of the realm? Theon shrugged, feigning nonchalance. It's worked before. Or would you prefer the entire realm to burn in another war? A duel might save countless lives. In that moment, Theon glimpsed the path ahead. A personal trial by combat could be the fire test the mysterious note hinted at, the demonstration of iron will that some in the realm demanded. If he fell, then perhaps he was never meant to hold the throne. But if he prevailed, he might unite the 7 kingdoms behind him, or at least command their respect. Ser Reynard stared at him, jaw tight. The eyes of the hall bore down on them both. Then, slowly, the Lannister man smirked. Very well, Greyjoy. If you want a show, you shall have it. Let it be known that I, Ser Reynard Hill, champion the cause of House Lannister, and I will fight you in single combat under the ancient laws. May the gods decide who truly deserves the throne. The tension in the hall was palpable, a living entity that crackled and hissed. Theon glanced around, catching glimpses of approval from some corners, trepidation from others. The stage was set, and the fate of his ambition hung in the balance. As the assembly began to disperse, whispers trailing behind them like shadows, Theon felt Yara's hand on his shoulder. Are you sure about this? She asked in a low voice. He nodded, heart pounding. Sometimes, sister, a king must prove himself in blood. She said nothing, but her grip on his shoulder tightened briefly before she walked away, leaving Theon alone with the echo of his own words. The challenge had been issued. The die cast. Soon, on the training grounds of cursed Harrenhal, Theon Greyjoy would face Ser Reynard in the old way of trial by combat. It was a gamble, but perhaps the only way to silence doubts. If he emerged victorious, no one could claim he was too weak to hold the Iron Throne. If he fell, then the realm would have one more ghost to add to Harrenhal's tally. Night fell in a quiet hush, but Theon found no rest. He paced the confines of his temporary chambers, haunted by memories of past battles and the cruel lessons he had learned at the hands of Ramsay Bolton. His body bore scars, reminders of pain that had once threatened to break him entirely. Yet he was still here, forging a new destiny. When at last exhaustion overtook him, he slumped into a restless sleep, thoughts of axes and lions swirling in his dreams. Outside, the rain drummed against the ancient stone of Harrenhal, a lullaby of water and ruin. In a castle that had seen the rise and fall of countless lords, Theon prepared for a contest that would determine the shape of the realm's future. The line between victory and annihilation felt gossamer thin, but that was the Ironborn way, to stand firm against the storm, to wrest triumph from the jaws of despair. He could almost hear the seas roar in his mind, urging him on. What is dead may never die, he thought, recalling the old words, but rises again, harder and stronger. In the coming dawn, he would find out if those words rang true. At daybreak, a cold mist swirled over Harrenhal's training grounds, turning the grass into a slick carpet and the air into a bid-in. Chill. The ramparts loomed dark and foreboding, their black stones scorched in places by dragonfire long ago, lending a grim backdrop to the clash that had decided Theon Greyjoy's fate. He had slain Ser Reynard Hill in single combat, proving his mettle to those who doubted him. Yet, as the first pale light crept into the vast courtyard, Theon felt the weight of a realm's eyes upon him more than ever. The hush that followed his victory seemed to echo with possibilities, dangers, and responsibilities. He had passed a trial by steel, but the next test lay in forging alliances and maintaining the tenuous trust he had begun to foster. By the time the sun rose fully above the broken towers, Theon had already bathed, dressed in fresh clothes, and gathered himself for another day of negotiations. Harrenhal's great hall smelled of damp stone, old rushes, and 1,000 failed ambitions. It was a fitting place to plot a future, if only to prove fate wrong about its curse on any house that tried to claim it. Yara awaited him there, arms folded. She wore plain leathers, ready for a fight if one came, though for the moment, the battlefield was the council chamber. Her lips twitched in a half-smile of acknowledgement. A fine show you gave them yesterday. The captains are talking about it even now. He nodded, forcing himself to keep a steady tone. They can talk all they want, but this was just one battle of many. We need their loyalty for more than duels. What's the mood among our men? Some are eager for raids. Others see sense in your new approach. Word has spread that we might soon deal with lords from the Reach, the Riverlands, maybe even the North. They're watching to see if you'll stand by the alliances you're forging, or if you'll revert to the Ironborn of old. A shadow of bitterness tugged at Theon's mouth. I doubt we can erase generations of mistrust overnight. Still, we've gained a foothold. If we stand our ground, maybe we can convince the realm we're serious. They made their way across the hall, where a makeshift map table had been assembled from planks set atop trestles. Lord Edmure Tully stood at one side, peering at lines inked across parchment. Garland Tyrell, representing the Reach's interests, pointed to certain key locations. Both men turned as Theon approached. Edmure offered a respectful nod. Your Grace. The title still sounded strange to Theon, but he embraced it. Lord Edmure, I trust you've had news from your agents in the Westerlands. Edmure's expression darkened. I have. Whispers say the Lannisters are reeling from your victory in single combat and from the heavy losses they sustained in previous wars. But never underestimate them. They're hiring sellswords, forging new alliances with those who still resent the Greyjoy name. In particular, we hear rumors that Braavosi coin may bolster their fleet. Garland Tyrell frowned. If they succeed at sea, they could disrupt trade, undermine your biggest strength, and starve out our alliances. The question is, do we wait for them to strike, or act first? Act first, Theon said without hesitation. A large chunk of Westeros still doesn't know what to make of a Greyjoy king. If we show we can defend the coasts effectively, perhaps by securing a strategic location like Fair Isle, we deny the Lannisters a foothold and prove our worth. That would be ambitious, Garland replied, trading a glance with Edmure. Yet in these times, boldness might be the only way. Still, I warn you, if you attack the wrong target or turn to needless raiding, you'll confirm everyone's worst suspicions about the Ironborn. Theon exchanged a look with Yara. We understand. We take no spoils that aren't necessary for the campaign. We don't burn villages. We focus on strategic gains. If the island's defenders yield, we spare them. Edmure tugged at the collar of his tunic. It won't be easy, but it might be exactly what we need to keep the Lannisters off balance. Meanwhile, I'll watch for any move they make inland. Lord Garland can coordinate with the other allies. If you succeed at Fair Isle, this new realm of yours becomes more than talk. Thus it was settled. Theon spent the day mustering Ironborn captains, ensuring they understood the plan: a swift strike on Fair Isle, minimal bloodshed if the locals surrendered. They would raise the Kraken banner and make the island a bulwark against future Lannister naval operations. Some captains grumbled about lost opportunities for loot. Others seemed intrigued by a campaign that blended the Ironborn's knack for sudden force with a king's claim to legitimate rule. Sansa Stark lingered in Harrenhal's corridors but did not attend these war councils. She was consumed with her own mission to correspond with northern houses, persuading them that Theon's new stance might serve their interests. Theon caught a brief glimpse of her once, red hair catching torchlight as she passed through a side hall, eyes distant with thought. They shared a nod, neither speaking. He knew she remained guarded, but at least they had reached a fragile understanding. At last, dawn broke on the day Theon departed. He left Harrenhal amid a column of Ironborn horsemen and supply wagons. The retinue carried enough arms and armor to equip a small invasion force once they reached the coast. Yara rode beside him, scanning the road. The journey was swift, though uncomfortably wet. Autumn rains slicked the roads, turned fields into mud. Nightly camps were watchful affairs, with Ironborn sentries posted at all angles. After many days, they reached the port where the Greyjoy longships were moored. The Sea Drake, Theon's flagship, bobbed in choppy waters as if impatient to return to war. No sooner had they arrived than the captains readied their decks, stowing supplies, sharpening weapons. By dawn, the sails caught the wind, oars dipped in unison, and the fleet set a westward course. Salt air invigorated Theon. Though the burdens of kingship pressed on his shoulders, there was something freeing about being at sea again. Navigating the capricious waters, feeling the surge of each wave, it reminded him that he was still Ironborn at heart, even if he was trying to reshape that identity into something the realm could accept. Yara's ship, the Black Wind, stayed close, guiding several smaller longships in a wedge formation. Days of sailing passed, the weather shifting from blustery squalls to eerie calms. At last, the watch reported land in the distance, the green rise of Fair Isle. It was early morning, the horizon tinted pink and gold. If the Lannisters had already garrisoned the island, Theon intended to land on a quieter beach far from the main harbor. He gave the order, and the fleet adjusted course, hugging the coastline. Gulls wheeled overhead, screeching as if to warn the islanders of approaching invaders. Theon carefully directed a portion of ships to wait offshore while smaller craft ferried the landing party. Oars dipped, water churned. Theon and Yara stepped into knee-high surf, leading armed Ironborn onto the sand. A chill wind tugged at Theon's cloak. Before them, a slope of grassy dunes rose toward farmland and, presumably, a watchtower or two. Theon inhaled, nerves and adrenaline mixing in his gut. Every campaign had its share of risk, but this one felt especially heavy with destiny. They pushed inland, scattering curious seabirds. Just beyond the dunes, they spotted a dirt road leading south. So far, no alarm bells. Perhaps the local inhabitants had grown lax after repeated wars. Yara crouched near a rise, holding a spyglass. There's a small settlement on the coast. A watchtower, maybe a few dozen fighters at best. We can overrun them or try offering terms. Terms first, Theon said. Remember, we're here to occupy, not destroy. They descended the slope, forming a loose battle line. Soon enough, a horn sounded from the watchtower and figures scrambled below. Theon raised a hand, calling out, "We come for Fair Isle in the name of King Theon Greyjoy. If you yield, no harm will come to you." The cry carried over fields where sheep grazed, oblivious to the tension. For a breathless moment, no one emerged. Then a nervous-looking man in a worn breastplate stepped forward, sword half-raised. Behind him stood perhaps 20 men, old or young, armed with spears or pitchforks. Their captain's voice shook. "We hold this isle for House Lannister." Theon's own voice remained steady. "If you fight us, you'll lose. You see how many ships we have? Surrender and keep your lives and your homes. If you resist, we'll do what must be done." A few of the men glanced at each other, fear etched on their faces. At length, the captain lowered his blade. "We aren't fools. We yield." Relieved, Theon exhaled. A small miracle. The Ironborn advanced, and aside from a few tense scuffles, the transition proved bloodless. By midday, the Kraken banner flew over the watchtower, and Theon's men patrolled the roads, confiscating any remaining arms. Townsfolk watched from behind shuttered windows, uncertain whether to rejoice or tremble. Theon couldn't blame them. History taught that Ironborn occupation meant torment. But that night, he convened a gathering in the hall that had once served as the local lord's seat. He allowed the captain to speak on behalf of the townsfolk. "We'll not rob you or burn your homes if you abide by my rule," Theon said. "But we will raise fortifications here and guard the port. Any who oppose us risk open conflict." The captain gulped and nodded. "We understand. Just keep the peace." Yara eyed the man, then nodded to Theon. "We'll keep the peace, so long as no Lannister warships arrive unannounced." In the following days, Theon fortified key positions along the coastline. They installed ballistae on the watchtower, set up beacon fires on cliffs to warn of incoming fleets, and repaired the local harbor's quays. Ironborn discipline held, thanks to Yara's firm hand. Looting was punished, drunkenness curtailed. Restless though some were, they saw the advantage of controlling a valuable island without stirring the realm's ire. That advantage was tested soon enough. One morning, a scout reported sails on the western horizon, at least a dozen, some bearing Lannister crimson, others unknown insignias. Theon's gut clenched. If the Lannisters had allied with Braavosi mercenaries, they might attempt to retake the island swiftly. He mustered the Ironborn ships in a defensive line near the harbor, ordering catapults readied on deck. Rowers waited with tense faces or still. At last, the enemy fleet appeared, anchored in a broad formation. A horn blast echoed, and soon their sails unfurled. Theon watched from the prow of the Sea Drake, brine in his hair and sword at his side, as the Lannister Braavosi force advanced. Flaming pots arced overhead, smashing into the water or striking the decks with bursts of fire. Arrows whistled. The air smelled of smoke and salt. Theon roared, row, and his vessels surged forward. With a thunderous crash, the Sea Drake rammed a Braavosi galley. Ironborn boards and grappling hooks followed, men hurling themselves across the gap. The deck erupted in steel-on-steel chaos. Theon parried a spear thrust, countered with a slash that cut the man down. Nearby, Yara's axes whirled, carving a path through mercenaries clad in mismatched armor. Arrows from a Lannister war galley hammered into the Ironborn at close range. Theon bellowed for crossbowmen to return fire while the rowers shifted position to avoid the next flaming missile. Another pot crashed into a smaller Ironborn ship, igniting its sail. Screams sounded as men leapt overboard. Theon gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay focused. Gradually, the Ironborn gained the upper hand. Their knowledge of the shallow waters near Fair Isle allowed them to pivot swiftly, ramming or boarding the less maneuverable enemy vessels. One Lannister captain, a tall knight in gilded plate, swung a warhammer that splintered a section of railing, nearly toppling Theon. But Theon ducked under the next strike and drove his sword into the man's thigh. The knight collapsed with a groan, and an Ironborn raider finished him off. On the far side of the melee, Yara's ship locked horns with the Braavosi flagship. Mercenary archers tried to hold back the Ironborn, but Yara led a vicious boarding action up the side, hurling men overboard. Fire pots flew from both sides, painting the water in blazing reflections. Finally, the Braavosi flagship began to list, its deck awash in blood. Surrender cries rose from pockets of cornered fighters. One by one, the enemy line broke. Ships either burned or struck their colors in surrender. A few tried to flee westward, battered and in disarray. Theon's lungs burned with every breath, his limbs heavy with exertion. Nevertheless, he guided the Sea Drake alongside the Lannister flagship, from which only sporadic resistance remained. Ironborn swarmed the deck, disarming the final defenders. The ship's captain, a proud man with lion sigils on his cloak, knelt, tossing aside his sword. "We yield," he gasped. At that, the fight ended. The sea around Fair Isle was littered with wreckage, dead men drifting among broken masts and oil-slick flames. Theon felt only grim satisfaction. Another triumph, but it had cost them dearly. Over half a dozen Ironborn ships were lost or crippled. Their wounded cried out for healers. Yara, sweat and blood staining her tunic, stumbled over to Theon as they regrouped. "They're finished," she said hoarsely. "We hold Fair Isle." He nodded, scanning the aftermath. "Gather prisoners, treat the wounded, ours and theirs. We'll show no cruelty to those who surrender. Let them see we're not butchers." She looked somewhat surprised, but she nodded and barked orders. Ironborn men grimaced but complied, dragging the captives into a holding area. As Theon took stock, the battered remains of the Lannister Braavosi fleet scattered or sank, ensuring no immediate threat. Fair Isle was secured, at least for now. That night, the entire harbor stank of smoke and death. Theon arranged a war council in the commandeered hall. Though exhausted, he forced himself to plan the next steps. "We've proved we can hold territory," he said. "The realm will hear of this victory. It should bolster our alliances, show we mean business." One older captain spat. "What good's that if we can't raid for plunder?" Yara's eyes flared. "You want to invite the entire Westerlands to unite against us again? We're here to rule, not to reeve for sport." Muttering continued, but Theon held firm. If they devolved into old habits, every potential ally would recoil. Over the next days, they repaired ships, salvaged enemy vessels, and scouted for signs of a second Lannister attack. None came. The local population remained wary, but Theon's men avoided looting, which began to erode some of the fear. Still, he knew victory here was a step, not the end. If House Lannister redirected its energies to a land campaign, Edmure Tully and Garland Tyrell might need immediate reinforcements. The North, likewise, would not join him wholeheartedly without proof of stability. So Theon decided. Yara would stay on Fair Isle, command the local defenses, and he would return east to coordinate the broader alliance. Yara gave him a half-smile tinged with concern. "Guarding an island from the next attack while you play king with the lords. I suppose that fits us both. Send a raven if the Lannisters stir again," he said. "You'll hold this place, or at least buy time until I can return with reinforcements." She clasped arms with him. "Good luck, brother." Thus, Theon departed with a contingent of Ironborn ships. They sailed away from Fair Isle's cliffs, battered prows glinting in the sun. Theon gazed back at the Kraken banner fluttering defiantly, marking another improbable milestone in his claim for the throne. Pride mingled with worry. So many battles loomed on the horizon, not just with steel but with words and alliances. Upon reaching the mainland, he rode with a small escort through the Riverlands, the land still scarred from past wars. Smoke from hearth fires curled into a pewter sky, and farmers watched him pass with a mix of curiosity and caution. He arrived at Harrenhal to find the courtyard bustling with new faces. More Riverlander levies, a party of Tyrell knights, even a Dornish envoy or two. The realm was stirring, uncertain which side would prevail but eager to find advantage. Edmure Tully greeted him in the yard, relief evident. "You return victorious, I hear." "We took Fair Isle, repelled a Lannister attempt," Theon confirmed. "They won't be eager to face us at sea again soon." Edmure led him inside, where Garland Tyrell and others gathered around a new map spread. "An impressive feat," Garland said. It weakens the Lannisters' naval power, but they still muster on land. Tyrique Lannister is rallying vassals. The phrase, too, threatened from the twins. We can't let them pin us between two armies. Theon nodded gravely. We must unify faster. Where do we stand with the North? That cue brought Sansa Stark forward. She had been watching from the side, her expression pensive. I've spent much effort sending ravens, making personal visits. Lord Wyman Manderley at White Harbor is open to backing you, if certain terms are met. The Manderleys want strong guarantees that the North remains autonomous, that Ironborn raids never again harass our coasts, and that Bolton loyalists are crushed so their evil doesn't rise again. Theon's throat tightened at the mention of Boltons, but he replied calmly, I can agree to that. The North's acceptance is vital. I'll go to White Harbor. Speak with Manderley face to face. Edmure looked dubious. Traveling north takes you far from Harrenhal just when the Lannisters might push into the Riverlands. Garland Tyrell placed a hand on Edmure's shoulder. We can hold Harrenhal for a time. Let Theon seal the Northern Alliance. Once the North commits, the Lannisters will think twice before moving. Sansa met Theon's gaze. Then we leave soon. It's a long road. He nodded. Gather who you need. We'll set out at first light. A hush followed as though all understood the gamble. Theon parted to rest, though he barely slept. He was forging a realm from mistrust and scars. If the North refused him, the entire structure might collapse. Morning came, cold and gray. Theon and his retinue, Ironborn, a few Riverlanders, and Sansa Stark with her guards rode from Harrenhal's gates. The old fortress loomed behind them like a silent judge, its twisted towers bearing witness to one more attempt at forging history. They took winding roads, crossing the Trident's tributaries, forging north past farmland battered by prior wars. Nights were spent in cramped inns or under the stars, the weather turning damp and chilly. Sansa rarely spoke beyond necessary logistics, her focus bent on persuading the North. Theon sometimes caught her studying him. He wondered what she saw, the ward she once knew, the betrayer who tried to claim Winterfell, or the battered survivor struggling to do better. At length, they reached the outskirts of White Harbor. The city's white walls and shining towers came into view beneath an overcast sky. Boats dotted the waterfront, a testament to the Manderleys' maritime commerce. A retinue of knights in sea-green cloaks escorted Theon inside, through broad streets, toward the Merman's Court. Tension coiled in his belly. The next hours might shape everything. Lord Wyman Manderley awaited them, seated on a chair shaped like a merman's tail, his great bulk draped in fine velvets. Though he rose to greet Sansa warmly, he eyed Theon with cool appraisal. So, the Ironborn king arrives. I hope your titles aren't just bravado. Theon inclined his head. Lord Wyman, I come to make good on the alliances we've discussed. The North deserves its autonomy, and the realm deserves a stable crown that isn't beholden to Lannister gold. Manderley motioned to a table laden with pies, roast fish, and tankards of ale. Sit, then. Convince me. They talked for hours in a hall with mosaic floors depicting fish and waves. Manderley ate heartily, never missing a chance to question Theon about trade routes, taxes, the fate of any Bolton loyalists. Sansa vouched for Theon's sincerity, reciting the victories at Fair Isle and the careful terms hammered out with the Riverlands. Theon pledged no Ironborn raids would menace northern shores, that the North would rule itself under a High King, and that he would personally see to the extermination of any remnant Bolton threat. Lord Manderley stroked his beard. I'm not blind to the North's sufferings. We bled under the Boltons, we lost good men to the Ironborn in past rebellions, we nearly starved under Lannister blockades. If your rule spares us more bloodshed, that may be enough. But fail the North, and I'll see you thrown back into the sea. A hush followed. Then Manderley signaled for parchment and quills. Deeds were drafted, alliances spelled out. When all was written, Theon pressed his seal alongside Lord Manderley's. Sansa and other witnesses added theirs. At the final flourish, Manderley declared, White Harbor will stand with you, King Theon Greyjoy, if you stand by these pledges. See that you do. That night, a modest feast was held. Theon felt a swirl of emotions, relief, doubt, a flicker of pride. White Harbor's oath might encourage other northern lords to follow. If so, the Lannisters would face a united front from north and south. Yet a quiet voice in his mind warned that old grudges died hard. Would the North truly rally behind a Greyjoy? Lord Manderley encouraged him to go to Winterfell. Convince the rest, he said. If you can stand in the ancient seat of House Stark and hold your head high, maybe they'll believe you. So Theon did. He departed after a short respite, accompanied by Sansa and a small guard of Manderley knights. As they rode deeper into the north, the wind grew sharp, the forests tall and dark. Villagers watched from doorways, uncertain. Some recognized Sansa bowing or calling blessings. They looked upon Theon with wariness, but no pitchforks were raised. The letter from White Harbor had traveled ahead, proclaiming an alliance. And so, after days of cold travel, Winterfell loomed beyond a snowy plain, its walls solemn under a gray sky. Memories rippled through Theon, the boy who had once laughed with Robb Stark, the invader who stole the castle, the broken wretch who lost himself in this place's dungeons. Now he returned seeking acceptance, not conquest. The gates opened, admitting them into a courtyard lined with watchful eyes. Sansa dismounted and was greeted by a handful of northern lords. Theon felt their stares like daggers. Lord Glover stepped forward, broad-shouldered and grim. "Lady Sansa, we welcome you back. As for you, Greyjoy, we'll see if you can redeem what you destroyed." Theon exhaled. "All I ask is a chance to prove we can unite against the Lannisters. I won't betray you again." Inside the great hall, the atmosphere was tense. Several northern lords had come. Some from houses battered by Ironborn raids or Bolton cruelty, others simply tired of war. Sansa introduced Theon, recalling how he had rescued her from Ramsay Bolton, how he had fought to end Lannister aggression at sea. He stood, faced them all, and admitted his failings. He spoke of a new realm, the North free to follow its own ways, the Iron Islands as protectors of maritime trade, the Tullys and Tyrells in alliance to end the cycles of destruction. Debate raged into the night. Some demanded Theon punish every last Bolton loyalist. Others insisted the North should be a separate kingdom. Sansa skillfully steered them toward compromise, reminding them that Lannister armies massed on the Gold Road. By dawn, they hammered out a charter. The North would swear fealty to King Theon Greyjoy, on condition he uphold northern autonomy, station no Ironborn raiders here, and root out any threat from old Bolton enclaves. Weary to the bone, Theon signed the treaty with a trembling hand. Several lords did likewise. It was not unanimous approval, but enough. A new chord had been struck in the halls of Winterfell. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the windows, Theon stepped outside into the courtyard's light snowfall. He breathed the cold northern air, recalling the boy who once felt so alien here. Now, he felt something that might have been acceptance, or at least a chance at it. Sansa appeared at his side, tugging her cloak closed. "They've agreed more or less. Not fully, but enough to shift the balance. If they see you honor these vows, you'll have the North." He let out a slow breath. "Thank you for standing by me in there. I know how hard it must be to trust me after everything." She hesitated, then offered a small, genuine smile. "I'm learning that people can change if they truly want to. The question is whether they stay changed when tested. Don't fail these lords, Theon." He lifted his gaze to Winterfell's ancient battlements. "I won't. We've come too far to let the realm slide back into endless war. Now, with the North and the Riverlands, the Reach, and the Iron Islands allied, perhaps the Lannisters will finally bend. Or, if they don't, we'll stop them together." Snow drifted between them, a silent witness to a fragile new era. Theon reflected on the twisted path that brought him here. From ward to betrayer, from broken captive to a king forging peace. Winterfell's walls, once a symbol of guilt, now stood as a testament to the potential of redemption. Somewhere deep inside, Theon felt a flicker of hope that this time the realm might unite behind him and that he, in turn, might finally be worthy of the crown he claimed.